All right, let's talk about something fascinating and, a little unsettling. What if the darkest parts of someone's personality weren't really hidden at all? What if they left little clues right there on their face for all of us to see? I mean, seriously, think about it. You're on a first date or in a job interview or just walking down the street. Could you just look at someone and know? It sounds like something out of a crime show, but what does the actual science have to say about it?
Well, believe it or not, researchers are actually starting to find real, measurable physical traits that seem to correlate with some of humanity's, let's say, less desirable personality traits. It kind of seems like maybe you can judge a book by its cover.
But, and this is a really big but, our own instincts, those snap judgments we make in a split second, can be so powerfully, even dangerously wrong. And that can lead to some truly serious consequences. So yeah, let's dive into this. Okay, so first things first. Before we can even start looking for facial clues, we need to be clear on what we're actually looking for. You hear the word psychopath thrown around all the time, right? Well, in psychology, it's actually part of a specific framework called the dark triad. I know, it sounds like the title of a fantasy book, but the dark triad is a very real concept. It's made up of 3 separate, and let's be honest, pretty unpleasant personality traits that, while distinct, can definitely overlap in one person. So let's just quickly break these down. You've got psychopathy, which is that classic lack of empathy and remorse. Then there's narcissism, we all know this one. It's that inflated ego, that desperate need for everyone to admire you. And finally, Machiavellianism. That's the cold, calculating use of manipulation and deceit just to get ahead. It's really important to keep these 3 in mind as we go. All right, so where do we start our investigation? Let's go with the most famous stereotype of all, something we've all seen in movies a million times, the eyes. Is there any truth to that whole psychopath stare thing? Well, this is where things immediately get flipped on their head. Hollywood always gives us that intense, piercing, unblinking stare. But the science? It actually points to the complete opposite. Studies show that people with high psychopathic traits are less likely to look you in the eye, and they take longer to make eye contact in the first place. So what's going on here? Why the disconnect? Well, they often look away because they have a hard time processing emotions, which, is exactly what we read in each other's eyes. Plus, their pupils don't dilate the way they should when they see something upsetting or hear a disturbing sound, like a scream. It's that sort of muted response in their nervous system that can make their eyes seem wider and less reactive, which is what creates the illusion of that cold stare from the movies. Okay, so the eyes tell a much more complicated story than we thought. But what about other parts of the face? Are there any other features that might be giving these dark traits away? Yup, you heard that right. Eyebrows. I know, it sounds completely bizarre, but a study out of the University of Toronto found a surprisingly strong connection between a person's eyebrows and how narcissistic other people thought they were. The way they figure this out is just fascinating. They had people rate photos for narcissism, and participants were consistently able to pick out the narcissists. And the biggest clue? The eyebrows. Their thickness, their density, how well groomed they were. Get this, when the researchers actually photoshopped different eyebrows onto the faces, the narcissism rating followed the brows. The theory is pretty simple. Narcissists just care more about their appearance, and that includes their eyebrows. Okay, so moving on from grooming, there might be clues just in the basic structure of the face itself. Let's look at something called the facial width to height ratio, or FWHR. It's basically just a measurement of how wide a face is compared to how long it is. Now, what's really interesting here is that this connection was found to be significant only in men. A higher FWHR, so a wider face, correlates with higher testosterone. And that in turn is linked to things like aggression, dominance, and being more insensitive. But here's a weird twist. It also correlated with lower self-reliance. The thinking is that this might suggest a greater tendency to manipulate others to get what they want. So let's recap. We've got some scientific clues, how people use their eyes, their eyebrows, even the basic structure of their face. It seems like we should be getting pretty good at spotting these traits, right? Well, this is where our own psychology comes in and just messes everything up. Get ready for this, because the results from a huge 3-country study are absolutely shocking. People were actually pretty good at spotting narcissism. Okay, but they were almost completely useless at spotting Machiavellianism. And for female psychopathy,
They weren't just bad, they were worse than random guessing. That means something about the faces of women with psychopathic traits was actively tricking people into thinking they were trustworthy. So what on earth is going on? It all comes down to something called the halo effect. For whatever reason, studies show that people with dark triad traits are often seen as being more attractive. And our brains are wired with this really dangerous shortcut. We just instinctively trust a pretty face. It's a cognitive bias that can override everything else.
And this is where it stops being some fun psychological trivia and the stakes get incredibly high. This isn't just about picking the wrong person to date or to hire. This flawed judgment has profound, life-altering consequences in the very systems we count on to be fair. The price of a bad first impression can be absolutely devastating.
Just think about that for a second. In a courtroom where objective evidence is supposed to be king, someone's entire future can literally depend on how agreeable a jury thinks their face looks. They are statistically more likely to be found guilty, not because of the facts of the case, but because of a gut feeling someone got from their face.
And it gets even more terrifying. The exact same principle applies to the most severe penalty our justice system has. A person's chances of receiving the death penalty are influenced by whether jurors perceive their face as trustworthy. It is a literal life or death judgment being made, in part, based on how someone looks. Just let that sink in for a moment.
And what makes this whole problem so hard to fix is that these biases are incredibly stubborn. Research shows that even when you tell people straight up that their face-based judgments are wrong, that first impression sticks. We form these opinions in less than a second, and once they're locked in, it takes an overwhelming amount of counter-evidence to change our minds. Our brains are just hardwired for it.
Okay, so if human judgment is this flawed and this biased, what about technology? Can we turn to artificial intelligence to maybe make these kinds of assessments more objectively, more fairly? And at first glance, it actually looks kind of promising. A massive study used AI to analyze photos of MBA grads and found it was pretty good at predicting their future career success, how much they'd be paid, and their seniority. So maybe the machines really can see something we can't. But, and this is the critical counterpoint from ethics experts like Dorothea Bauer, the AI isn't finding some hidden objective truth. It's learning from the data we feed it, and that data is filled with all of our own human biases. So the AI isn't really predicting success, it's just reflecting the same flawed judgments human hiring managers already make, but it's stemping them with a dangerous seal of scientific objectivity. And that's really where this leaves us. We know our own brains take these dangerous shortcuts, and we know that our technology is probably just going to amplify those same flaws. So the real question isn't just about whether you can spot a psychopath. It's about how we can overcome our own faulty programming to make fairer, more accurate, and more compassionate judgments about each other. So, what do you think?